County depends on WDXE News, on the air since 1951. This is The Legend. 105.3, 95.3, WDXE.
It is 8:06 in time for the Friends and Neighbor Hour with yours truly, brought to you by Keller Williams Hood Company. My guest today is a friend of mine, Mr. Dwight Phillips. Dwight, thank you for coming in today.
Good morning.
Appreciate you being here, man.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. We've thought about having you before and finally got it hooked up, and you're kind enough to agree to come on short notice too, I must say.
No problem.
No problem. Well, for those of you who don't know, Dwight, I guess, was made locally famous from his appearance on the show Forged in Fire. Forged in Fire, that show aired in 2018 that you were a participant in. And my son and I were very much into watching that at the time. And we ran into you and met you sometime after that. And of course, so I would say you're locally famous, maybe.
Well, I don't know. I've done the best I could on that show.
You did awesome. You did an awesome job, and I may have to go back and find that episode and watch it again before too long. But anyway, I wanted to kind of get your history though, and we'll lead up to your appearance there on that show, and then you've got some other things to tell us where you've been working and doing. And I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about that. But how did life start for Dwight Phillips? How did life start with you?
Well, I was born and raised in Wayne County up till I was 14.
Oh, really?
And my parents, we moved here to Lawrenceburg in around 77. And I graduated from Lawrence County High School. So...
what year did you graduate high school?
83.
83. You're a little behind me, 83. Now, your folks, were they native Wayne Countyans? They originally from there to start with? Or?
Yes, Wayne County. My daddy, he worked at Carl Phillips. He worked at Murray Lawnmower Company for like 44 years.
Oh, yeah. A lot of folks
Yes.
were affected by Murray, worked at Murray. What did he do in Murray? You remember?
Well, he done several things, but the end there, he was touch-up man in the paint department.
In the paint department, okay. All right, did your mom work too, or just?
Yes, she worked at Murray for a while, but she was a homemaker too.
Oh,
so.
yeah. What about brothers and sisters? Do you have brothers and sisters?
No brothers and sisters.
Okay, all right. So it was just you coming up and graduated 83 Lawrence County High School. What did you do out of high school?
Well, out of high school, I actually went to work at Murray.
Like a lot of us.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
So I worked there about 3 years, and then from there I went to work at a place that makes electrical wire in Florence, Alabama. At the time, it was called Royal Electric.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
life rolled on for Dwight.
it did.
It did. You told me you have a daughter.
I have a daughter named Tricia Ringelstein, and I have 3 grandkids.
3 grandbabies. How about that? Now, how old are grandbabies or thereabouts?
Well, they grow up fast.
Yeah.
My grandson's 16, and there's one. It's 2 girls. One's Lakin, she's 10, and my youngest one's 4.
Okay, so you got a good spread there. That's good.
That's good. Yeah.
That's good. Now they live in Leoma. You told me.
Live in Leoma.
Yeah. Well, good deal. So what are you doing presently? I mean, are you working for yourself or?
Just working for myself, just making knives
Okay.
as orders come in, and
Okay.
just enjoying doing that. I really do.
Well, good deal. When did you get started? Let's go back to what got you interested in getting started on that, working on the metal like that.
Well, I guess when I was about 16, I made my first knife.
Oh, really?
And it was just, it was really crude, but I was proud of it. And then later, they started having Crockett days out here at the Crockett Park. And
Okay.
There's a guy out there doing some forging. He forged out a knife, and I went home and built me a forge.
Oh, you did?
I did, and really didn't know what I was doing. At that time, you didn't have all the information that you have now on the internet. You do,
Yeah.
But I was, so it just started from there, and just kept practicing and kept working at it, and worked under some great knife makers too that helped me along.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Did you pretty much work completely on your own, or did you get some training? Or
Well, I did for a while, and then I met up with a master smith named Ken Durham, and learned a lot from him. He's from Cherokee, Alabama. And then later I worked or learned a lot from Alex Daniels, he's passed away now, but he was from Town Creek, Alabama.
Okay.
And he was really good. Both of them was good, and they directed me in the right direction.
Well, that's good. I'm impressed by watching it. You know, Daniel and I used to watch the show that we've talked about, and of course, I'm like you. You know, Crockett Days was a big deal way back in the day, and seeing those guys with the forges and watch them work the metal has always been interesting, fascinating. I always thought I'd like to do it, but never took it on.
It just kind of planted a seed when I seen them guys doing that, and I just wanted to try it, and I just stayed on it, kept after it.
Yeah, that's
You know.
good. What about how did you? I guess you began to accumulate. You know, you said you made your own forge. How did that? What's the process of doing that? What did you do?
Well, it's funny. The first forge I built was, believe it or not, it was made out of, made a wooden box, and I lined it with red clay and put a steel pipe in it, and that was my first coal forge.
Really?
And then later on, when I got my own place, I built a brick forge, coal forge. And then now I don't use coal anymore. I use propane. So I use a propane forge now. Really? Which is a lot cleaner and faster. And so that's how it kind of got started. That first forge, I didn't know if it was going to burn up or not. You know, it's got a wooden lining around it.
Oh yeah.
But I lined it with red clay.
Red clay.
That's when I was about 17 years old. I'd done that.
So how did you know to do that, or did you seen it done, or?
Well, I didn't really see that done. I just kind of thought about it, and it's pretty simple. You just have air. It's got to be forced up from the bottom to force air into the hot coals, and it's going to make it a lot hotter.
Yeah, and that's the process. It's just a fire is not going to do it.
No, you need to force air onto it, which is oxygen, of course.
Yeah.
And it's going to make the fire a lot hotter. It's going to get it up there to 2,000 degrees or more.
Wow. So the metal that you use, especially on the beginning, tell me kind of the process of learning the metals.
Well, in the beginning, I was just using, to make knives, I was using leaf springs, coil springs, ball bearing races. But now I use steel that I order. I want to know exactly what kind of steel it is. So I order my steel now. It's usually 1095 or 1084 carbon steel.
Interesting. Wow. But that was a learning process, I'm sure.
It is, and different steels heat treat different. So you just the heat treats when you harden a piece of steel and then temper it. So whatever you're making, if it's going to be a small knife or a big bowie knife or a big chopping knife, you got to pick out the steel that's good for that task that you're going to do it with. I mean, that you're going to use it for.
That's interesting.
So it's.
I had a very, very brief exposure to metallurgy, and learning the properties of some of the metals, that kind of thing. But I've forgotten most of what I learned, and didn't learn a lot then either. But one of the things that when I went to work at Fafner Bearing, you mentioned the bearing race. Mm-hmm. A lot of people may not know what that is, but I do, because I worked at a ball bearing factory for a little while over in Pulaski. And, of course, they were, cutting those out of big steel bars. And we had the tube mills and all, not a tube mill, but I can't think of the name of it now, but it's called a screw machine. That's what it was called. And they'd cut those rings out to make the ball bearing races. And there was a certain kind of steel it had to be, and it was heat treated, all that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting.
Well, usually that steel is 52-100, and also leaf spring steel is usually 51-60.
Okay.
So you got to know, what kind of steel you're using, so you'll know how to heat treat the steel.
Yeah. I got a set of knives, not a set, but a knife was given to us, Teresa and I, many years ago. It was a kitchen knife, and it was a homemade knife. It was made out of a saw blade. Mm-hmm. You might want to elaborate on people doing that.
Well, when I was a teenager, I did make some out of saw
Like a
blade.
handsaw.
Yes,
Yeah.
and but later, as time went on, I chose to use steel.
Yeah.
It's a little bit better than that, but it still makes a good knife.
Yeah.
Usually the sawmill blades are L6
Yeah.
or 15 and 20.
Yeah.
Is usually what that steel is on those.
Interesting. Well, you've learned a lot over the years, evidently.
It's
So you started at 16 working this.
I did.
Have you done it constantly since then, or?
Well, there was a time where I kind of took a break from it for 4 or 5 years, probably in my 20s there. But when I met up with Ken Durham and some of those guys that was really good at it, I really thought, well, I've got to get with it if I'm gonna try to do something with it,
Right.
to get to the point to where I want to be at.
Right.
And I'm still not where I want to be. I'm learning all the time.
Yeah.
Well,
I guess in any craft, it's a craft. It's also an art to this, I would think, and you're always reaching for that notch up.
yes, there's different. There's knives for skinning. There's Bowie knives, but then there's art knives. The knives you can use them, but they are works of art. That's really what I like to make.
Yeah.
Is what we call art knife.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but an art knife or a knife today that's a handmade, I would say upper end that's professionally made, that you're doing. What's the cost of that? If someone wanted to purchase, I guess they're all over the board, but
It is. It's all. It just depends. I made one dagger where I made the Damascus steel for it, and it had 4 rubies in it and 2 diamonds.
Oh, my.
It had 14 karat gold inlaid in the handle. So when you're doing a high art knife like that, and you're hand making the steel as well, it's Damascus steel.
Yeah.
So a knife like that's going to, be up in $2,000 or $3,000 range.
oh
Easy.
yeah, easy.
Yeah.
Well, for those of us and those who may not know, what is Damascus steel?
Damascus steel is layered steel, and that's where you'll take 2 types of steel. It's usually 1084 and 15 and 20, and you'll layer up layers like a sandwich, and you'll forge weld that together.
Yes.
So now it's like looking at a book. On the edge of a book, you got all those layers of pages.
Yes.
So now you can work a pattern into that steel when you forge it, and then when you make the knife, you can't see any of those layers when you get the knife ground out
Yes.
until you etch it with acid. And when you do, it'll show up all those patterns where that steel went together.
Interesting.
So now you can take and work a pattern into that.
Yeah.
And there's so many patterns now. And you can come up with a pattern. If you don't write down all the steps you did, you'll forget it and won't be able to reproduce that pattern.
Interesting.
That's how complex it can get.
Yeah. Is there an advantage to a Damascus steel knife? I mean, I hear about it a lot, and I knew what it was because we watched Forged in Fire enough to know.
Right.
But is there an advantage to that type of a steel in a knife as far as its performance?
I'd say that it's not a advantage itself that is equal to 1095 or 1084 carbon steel.
Okay.
But you also enjoy the pattern that's in the steel. So it's a work of art.
Yeah, it's a decorative quality.
It is. You're
Yeah.
adding that to it.
Interesting.
So-
Interesting. Well, obviously you've got better and better. You hooked up with some guys that had great experience, learned a lot, and eventually where we heard of you and got to know something about you is you ended up on the show Forged in Fire.
Yes, sir.
Now I found out just before we came on the air that show was actually filmed close to a year before it actually aired.
Yes.
How did they contact you? How did that happen?
Well, I just got an email from them asking me to interview for the show.
Really?
And I'm a member of the American Bladesmith Society.
Okay.
So the American Bladesmith Society is a group of knife makers, and I assumed that they went to that site and found me on there.
Really?
And so they sent me an email and asked me to interview for it, and And so I interviewed for it, and we worked out a time to do it. You know, you got to have like a week or 2 week window to do this.
Yeah.
And I was working at the time in Florence, Alabama, so we had to get together on a time when I was on vacation.
Right.
To where I could go and do this show.
Interesting. Where is it? Where is it filmed?
It's filmed in New York.
In New York, New York City,
New York City,
Okay.
And I think we was in the Queens, what they call the Queens, it's Industrial Park.
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't even know that the show's being aired there. It's like a secret.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. Well, of course, we were familiar with it. Dan and I were watching that show pretty regularly, and still do sometimes. So kind of walk us through that experience, if you don't care. When you had to work out the time to go, do they pay your expenses to get there and all that kind of stuff?
They paid all my expenses. They already had my plane tickets ready. They paid for all my food, the motel. They paid for all the expenses.
Yeah.
So it was just
Are you there for a full 2 weeks, or what's the timing on that?
well, you're there for. The first day, you're supposed to make a knife of kind of your design, and they'll add something to it, and that's the first day, but it's actually 2 days really when they film it for that first day.
Okay.
So like, you got 3 hours to forge it out, 3 more hours to finish it.
Okay.
Now that's on the show I was on.
Okay.
All right. So that first 3 hours was done one day, and the next day they done the other 3 hours.
Okay.
But on the show, it kind of looks like they did it all in one day, but they just don't have the equipment and everything set up to do it in 2 days.
Now, I noticed that when I watched it, the guys would bring in their own bag of tools, but they also have the equipment already there.
They have some equipment, and you're allowed to bring 3 tools of your choice. I believe it was 3 tools of your choice. So I carried a set of dial calibers, and I actually carried a wooden hammer.
A wooden hammer?
Yeah, because when you're straightening the blade you've already forged out, you can use a wooden hammer and it won't distort what you've already hammered out.
Okay.
So, and I also carried my favorite steel hammer.
Okay.
That I've been using for years.
Okay.
So I carried 2 hammers, a wooden hammer and a steel hammer. And they got a kick out of the wooden hammer. I'd never seen anybody do that.
Really?
So, but
Kind of makes sense, though. It's kind of like a dead blow to the steel, I guess.
yes, it's not going to put any hammer marks.
Right.
So it's just going to hit it and straighten the blade. If the blade needs to be straightened
Interesting.
while it's hot,
That's smart.
And of course, you don't want your hammer to get caught on fire. So
That's true. And it would, I guess, if you leave it there too long. That's right. Interesting. So the first day happens, and on the show you're on, how many start? I'm trying to remember. Is there 4 of you that start out, or is it more than 4?
yes, there's 4. There's 4 it starts out.
And the guys that were there with you, do you remember where they were from, or?
Yes, there was Billy Bob Searle that was from Georgia. Wow, you got me on one of them there.
That's
But
okay.
Steve Corvett was another one, and those 2 guys there was really good.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a lot more experience than me, and I knew of them when I seen them at the motel.
Yeah.
And I sat down and talked with them that morning before the show started.
Yeah.
So, their knives been pictured in the magazines. And
Yeah.
I've got some that's been pictured in magazines, but mine's more towards your back, and theirs is more towards your front of the magazine. So, they was good, and I was worried about that.
Well, I imagine that's a lot of fun, though, to meet those guys
It was.
that have the same interest as you, and of course you're put in a situation where you're competing. But I guess there's a lot of good camaraderie between you guys.
It was, and we had a good time. We really did.
That's good. That's good. So day 1 happens, and they eliminate somebody after day 1, or what's supposed to be day 1.
Yes, they'll run your knife drill that you made on the show, the one I made on the show. I made a spear point buoy on the show. And the only thing I added to it is they want it to be a hidden tang with a with a nut on the end of it or a pommel on the end to hose the handle on.
Yeah.
So, that's the knife I chose to make on the show.
Okay.
Except for the things they added to the handle.
Right.
But they run it through a series of tests, and you don't know. You don't know what test is going to be, so you don't know how it's going to hold up.
Yeah.
And they eliminated the first guy that they got eliminated, Steve Corvett. Now he was a good bladesmith, but the pattern we had to pick out a Damascus pattern on the show to make.
Yeah. Okay.
And the pattern he picked out was super hard to make. He didn't have the time to make it, so they eliminated him because he didn't have the pattern.
Okay.
And then the next guy that was eliminated, his guard broke loose from his handle when they tried to drive it through a steel plate. So that got him disqualified. So that left me and Billy Bob.
Okay.
So that's how it was on that.
Oh, wow. Wow. Now all that happens on the show, you guys actually finish a knife on the show.
It's got 6 hours.
And that's, I guess, not knowing any more than I know about it, I guess that's a pretty aggressive timeline to make a knife.
It is, especially out of Damascus steel. You got to make the steel first.
Yeah.
And then you got to finish the knife. And
Wow.
I figured I was going to run out of time.
Yeah.
And I just barely did make it, really.
Well, good deal. But so you were the finalist, you and the other gentleman.
Billy Bob. Yes.
Billy Bob. Now, where was he from?
Georgia.
He was from Georgia.
Billy Bob
Now,
Sorrell.
at that point on the show, they send you home.
They do. At the end of that show there, they have a sword. They unveil a sword that they wanted us to make at home.
Yes.
And you had 5 days to make it. You had 45 hours to make it in. And when I got home here in Lawrenceburg on Sunday evening from New York, the next morning they was already at my house to ready to start filming for the next 5 days.
Oh, wow. So yeah, that's right. They do come and film you at home.
And it's like I didn't even have time to catch my breath, and it was hot. It was during August when we did that, and
Oh, my.
it was pretty tough. But
Yeah. Well, you ended up making what was the sword that you made?
the sword that they picked out for us to make, they picked it out, and it was called a Run-Fi, and I'll spell that out. It's RHOMPHAIA.
Wow.
And it's a sword. I never even heard of the sword before. I'd never seen one. And the sword is curved, but the cutting edge is on the inside of the curve.
Yeah, I remember.
So I'd never seen anything like that before. They said there's only a few examples been found of it. They think around 400 BCs when that sword was made.
Well, you ended up making a fantastic blade and sword.
Thanks.
And the best I remember, when you guys got back, y'all had to go back to New York.
Yes,
and bring the swords back.
Yes, after 5 days, we're right back on the plane, right back to New York, and they're going to put the swords through a series of tests then.
Wow. How do they ship that stuff, by the way?
Well, they asked me to build the crate, and they took it with them. The guys from Forge and Far took it with them, and they shipped it. So,
Okay. So it got there without you.
Yeah, I built a wooden crate, set mine in, wrapped it up real good. I got it razor sharp, and they took it from there.
Wow. So you get up there, and then they put those blades through the test.
They did. Now, you have no idea what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Until you walk out there and they start filming, you have no idea what kind of test it's
I got to
gonna
tell
be.
you, when I've watched this show, it looks like they intentionally try to destroy your work. That's got to be heart-wrenching to watch.
They're trying to make one of them fail.
Yes. That's got to get on your nerves a little bit after you put all that work.
It is. You have no idea, what they're going to do. So,
Wow.
And
Wow.
I was just happy mine survived.
Well, both swords survived well. They both did well, and they both looked great. They were, and I remember him talking about how it was a tough decision for them to make.
It was. When the judges was back there making the decision, I bet they spent an hour trying to choose which one. And they had to be one they choose.
Right.
They couldn't. So some of the people there with us was in charge of us said they never spend that much time. So it was a hard choice. And finally, mine was pretty heavy. So they said mine was just a little too heavy, and that's the only way they could do
Isn't that amazing?
So,
That's amazing. Yeah, well, you did a fantastic job.
Well,
Made a great
thanks.
showing, and of course, now do they keep those knives?
They kept the one I made on the show, but they actually shipped my sword back to me.
Oh, really? So
They
you
did.
have it.
I do. I have the actual sword.
That's
that was
awesome.
Used on the
That's
show.
awesome. Very, very good. Well, you have continued to perfect your craft. Still doing it.
Trying. I try to get better. That's what drives me. I don't want to just stay where I'm at. I want to try to continue to improve the quality of my knives and swords.
Yeah. We're talking with Dwight Phillips. Dwight Phillips, a Lawrenceburg guy, graduated high school here in '83. Dwight has made his home here in Lawrenceburg, and has a forge, and appeared on Forged in Fire. And now, are you doing this pretty much all the time?
I am, but I've slowed down a little bit. I kind of just work at my own pace when I want to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people ask me for knives, and I'll try to make knives for people, but I'm pretty slow at it.
Now, are you working anywhere else, or just doing?
No,
these?
I just doing the knives.
Just doing the knives. That's awesome. It's awesome that you get to do something you enjoy doing.
It is.
That's
I love
for
it.
sure. That's for sure. Well, Dwight, I know you've been. You and I talked just briefly before we went on the air here, and you mentioned that you have been in the Philippines recently.
I did. I spent the month of February in the Philippines.
So what brought that on? What's that about?
Well, what brought that on? I made friends with some people there, and a young lady there, and I kind of got the idea. Well, I'll just do a forging demonstration there in the town of Zimbagueto.
Zimbagueto.
Yeah, in the Philippines.
Interesting.
And so it was a fantastic trip. And last year I had a guy order a replica of the sword I used on the show.
Oh, really?
And I really didn't want to make it. It's a pretty big job, so I kind of priced it really high.
Yeah.
And he wanted it, so that paid for my whole trip to the Philippines there and back. So.
Oh, wow.
So I just thought I'd.
Was that guy? He wasn't. This is just a guy out there somewhere.
I had no idea who he was. He just sent me an email wanting a sword like the one on the show. So
Interesting.
And,
Are you getting orders from all over the country?
Well, I usually get orders. The show has helped out. I usually just get orders by word of mouth, and there's people that's been waiting on knives probably for a year. I mean, I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm just slow about getting around to,
Well, it's not something that's just on the shelf.
Right.
It has to be. Every knife that you make is a custom knife.
I don't want my knife making to turn into a factory. I'm just making them when I want to and the type that I want to now.
I should have asked you to bring some examples and didn't think about that.
I hardly ever have any.
You don't have any?
They're always made by, people order them, and I make them when they order them.
So you hadn't kept many then?
No. And the only knives I have, there is some I do have that I could have brought in, were I passed the ABS Mastersmith test, and I do have those knives.
Okay, cool.
So,
Now, what is that? Tell me a little bit about that.
It's the American Bladesmith Society.
Okay.
So you can join that society, and you have to wait 3 years, and you can test for the journeyman smith test. And you have to make 5 knives that are as perfect as you can make them. 1 test knife, the 6th knife, and you carry those to Atlanta, Georgia, the Blade Show, and there'll be 7 judges judge them. And if you can, if they meet the qualifications, then you're rated as a journeyman smith.
Really?
So you can wait then 2 more years and test for the Mastersmith test. And you have to make 6 more knives. But this time, one of those knives has to be a European quill and dagger out of Damascus steel that you make. and also the test knife has to be Damascus steel. So that was a challenge, and I was happy to have passed that test.
Wow. So you've become, what is your status with them?
The status is ABS Master Smith.
So you're so at this point you're ABS Master
Smith.
Master Smith.
Yes.
Interesting. That's a fascinating thing.
It doesn't mean I know everything. It just means that I've passed. I'm still learning.
Sure.
And I'm trying to improve all the time. But I was happy to say that I was the first person from Tennessee to pass that.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's amazing.
I was happy.
That's
to do
totally
it.
amazing. There's not a lot of you guys around.
I think there's 200 and something. I'd have to look on the website. You can go to the American Bladesmith Society website, and there's a list of the journeyman smiths and the master smiths, and there's some all over the world.
Yeah.
So there's people that comes from different countries to try to pass that test.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, congratulations to you.
Well, thank you.
And of course, you've spent a lot of years working it and perfecting what you do. Can you tell me something that sticks out in your memory, maybe that you learned somewhere along the journey that really changed things for you? Now, I know that's kind of a deep question. There's probably many things, but can you think of something?
What I've learned is the fact that anything you're going to do, if it's something you want to do, you need to do it. Because life is short.
Yeah.
You need to get on it. You need to get it done.
Yeah.
So, when they asked me to be on the show, I thought, well, I could go there and do bad. I could, it may not turn out too good.
Yeah.
You don't know how it's going to turn out.
That's
but
right.
Why not step up and try at least? So I've learned a lot, passing the test and doing that.
Yeah.
I'm not the best at it by any means, but you should. Life is very short, so you need to get with it and get on it.
That's good advice for anybody or
It
anything.
is. Anything you're going to do.
That's right. I agree with you. You may remember this. I had the wild idea that I might start trying to mess with this, and I called you because there was somebody that was selling out their metalworking tools, and I knew very little. And I called you. I said, I want you to come look at this stuff, and I think he probably ended up selling a lot of it or whatever.
Yes.
One of the things that everybody seems to always get interested in is the anvils.
Yes.
Talk about the different anvils and the quality of anvils and things that people look for in that, if you can elaborate on that.
Well, the anvil can be pretty important, but the older anvils are better, of course, than the new stuff that you get. But if you can find some of the older anvils, they're better. But for a knife making anvil, you really don't have to have the traditional anvil with the horn. If you just got a square top anvil, that's perfectly fine if it's good and flat. So you really don't have to have the traditional anvil where you're making, shoeing horses and stuff like that.
Right, right. You just need that good flat surface.
Yes.
That's made out of something that's going to hold up, I guess.
And the forge is really important. Nowadays, just about everybody's using propane.
Okay.
And you can either use a forced air propane forge or what they call the Ventura forge, which is kind of pulls air in on its own from the flow of propane. Okay. And so that's what I'd recommend is propane forges.
Yeah. I guess that's a whole lot cleaner.
It's a whole lot cleaner. You can control the heat a lot better too. Actually, cold is hotter than the propane.
Really?
You can burn up a piece of steel in a cold forge a lot quicker than you can a propane forge.
I guess that comes with time and experience. But how do you gauge and know when the metal is hot enough or too hot?
When you first stick a piece of steel in there, it's going to turn what we call black heat, which is just black and it's hot. But then it'll go to red, and then from red it'll go to kind of an orange color. That's where you want it at the forge.
You got to get to the orange.
That's for knives. To me, that's where it needs to be at. Now,
Okay.
if it's just blacksmithing, it can be a little different. But for carbon steel knives, it needs to be at that orange color. And you can, if you don't know the color, you can use a magnet. Actually, a magnet will not stick to it when it gets to the orange color.
Oh, really?
It will not. So you can use a magnet to test that color, and then once you see the color, you don't have to use the magnet anymore.
Okay, so once you kind of get your visuals on it, you know where
Yes.
you are.
Yes.
Interesting.
Now you can go past that, and like if you're forging Damascus, you need to go hotter than that. You need to get up about 2,300 degrees, and you're not melting the steel together, but you're going to get it to a certain temperature. If there's no air gets in between the layers and you hit it with a hammer, you're going to make that steel stick together. It's a forge weld.
It's a forged. It's what's called a forged weld.
Forge weld.
When you've got it hot enough that they merge and stick together.
You got to hit it with a hammer and it'll go together.
Okay.
But it has to be at that temperature, and you have to keep oxygen away. You know, like welding rods has got flux and stuff on, but the flux I use is the Bork's washing powders you get from Kroger's.
Oh, really?
Yes, it'll melt and flow over the piece of steel at 2,300 degrees. It'll look just like honey flowing over the steel.
Really?
So,
wow.
And that seals the steel. That seals it in, because if you get oxygen in there between the layers, it'll keep it from welding.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I had no idea. I've always enjoyed watching someone do that. It's just amazing. Now, as far as bringing the blade to a certain shape, kind of describe the process, if you don't care, on how you get there. Because you're hitting it with a hammer,
Yes.
and I guess there's some shaping that takes place with that. But is there some shaping prior to that, or?
It depends on too what shape is the steel. Is it just a square piece of steel, or I've made knives out of round bars of carbon steel before.
Right.
So it just depends. You're usually going to start out at the tip. You're going to start at the tip, work the tip to a point, and you can actually work the tip down. And when you work it down, that straight part, that's where you'll work the edge then, and it'll actually make the tip come back up when you get to it. Forging the bevels.
Oh, okay.
But there's a whole process.
Now,
It just depends on what you're making.
Do you use the machine hammer much, or is it just usually hand hammered?
I used electric hammers nowadays as much as possible. I have a 25-pound little giant trip hammer, and I have a hydraulic press too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So the hydraulic press will just press it.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that used on the show, I guess.
Well, on the show they have a hydraulic press and they have an air hammer, and my little giant, what they call it, that's the name of the company that built it. They started out in 1890 something building these electric hammers. You're coming right out of the blacksmith time. We get electricity now. Hey, we want an electric hammer.
Yeah.
We're getting tired of using our, handheld hammer. We want an electric hammer. So they came up with that little giant trip hammer, and I was lucky enough to find one of them. Very lucky.
That's good. Have you met any more, I guess, there are at least, I don't know, 2 or 3 different folks around here that I've run into that are somewhat local that have made knives or they make knives. Maybe not on the same level or not been on the show, I guess, but that anybody else that I know of around here. But you probably know of several people around that are knife makers.
I know of several people, and people will come and to my shop, and they'll see my shop and look at all my equipment, and we'll talk about back and forth things they do and I do, and we get different ideas from each other.
Yeah.
And right now there's a guy in Fairview, Tennessee, that is one of my students.
Okay.
Because I've had people come there and I've shown them some things. This guy's really stuck with it. His name's Travis Blares, and he's really stuck with it, and he's doing some good work too. So yeah. He'll come down and we'll work through problems that he may have, and I learn from everybody else too. So
you mentioned students. Now, do you do
Well, it's just kind of one-on-one basis. If somebody wants to come over, and we'll talk about what you need to get started.
Okay.
I've done that several times. I've had people call me from other towns and come down, and they find my name on the internet, and I give them the best advice, what you need or what direction you're gonna go. Where you're just gonna make all hunting knives, or if you're gonna, you can either make forged knives or what they call stock removal knives, where you just buy a piece of steel, cut it out, heat treat it, and you don't do any forging. So it's two ways of going right there.
Okay.
I do both ways.
Okay.
It all depends on the steel.
Depends on the purpose of the knife, I guess.
Yeah, it does. And
what are the most requested knives that you get that you personally get?
it's usually here locally. It's usually a skinning knife.
Skinning knife.
Yes.
Now that doesn't necessarily have to be Damascus, does it?
No. A lot of times I make some of those knives out of stainless steel.
Yeah.
But it's a stainless steel you can't buy locally. It's a real high grade stainless steel, and it just depends on what the customer wants. I had one guy that wanted all his knives made out of D2 steel, which D2 is great steel, and I think I made a total of, seemed like 9 knives for him and his whole family, I believe, 7 or 8, 9, and just all. Lots of people will buy knives for Christmas presents, and stuff like that. So
that's an heirloom gift. It can be.
Yes, and they can use them. They can do whatever they're made to use.
Yeah.
A lot of the customers will buy the knives just for collecting, just to keep.
Oh yeah.
And they'll put them up to keep.
Put them up just to keep.
Like collecting coins or something.
Yeah, that's true. Well, a skinning knife, a usable knife that you make.
Yes.
I've been amazed watching that show anyway, at how incredibly sharp you guys can get a knife.
Yes.
Now, when I've toted a pocket knife for most of my life as a young boy, and all my, we've all had pocket knives, and we always try to get them sharp. But I don't think I've ever had a knife as sharp as what it feels like you guys get knives.
Travis Coles.
So how do you get a knife that doggone sharp?
Well, it's a series of steps, and like that sword I made for the show, that's a big, sharp sword.
Yes.
And even I got scared of the sword. I made the sword and I got scared of it. And the funny thing, when I done had that sword razor sharp, and I just barely hit the edge, and it laid my finger open, and blood was going all down the sword, and the people from Forge and Far is filming all that, and I made the comment, I said, "You'd like for me to cut my finger off, wouldn't you?" He said, "Well, I wouldn't tell you to do that, but it sure would make a good show."
Wow.
So it's a series of steps from going from a coarse stone to a finer stone, putting a really fine edge on it. And the funny thing is, I just helped my grandson sharpen his knife that I helped him make, and he's 16 now, so I'm letting him have a pretty sharp knife, but back 4 or 5 years ago, I kind of kept it dull for him.
A sharp knife, I mean, when they're that sharp, I mean, it's amazing. It's incredible what they can do.
It really is. I mean, the sword I made, I had a wild hog hanging up. He was already dead, of course, but they cut that hog in half with one swipe with that sword I made.
I remember.
I was amazed, really. So.
Wow. Those guys that are on that show, they are supposed to be experts in one way or the other. What were they like?
Well, 2 of the guys, Steve Corbett and Billy Bob, they was master smiths.
Yes.
So 3 of us that was on the show was master smiths, and right now my mind's blank on the other guy, and he was actually a beginner, and he done a great job, and I wish I could think of his name right now.
Yeah.
But he did a great job. So that it was 3 master smiths against, this guy's there was he hadn't been making knives for a year or 2, but he did a great job. But we, as far as we was friends.
Yeah.
And you're competing for that money, but we we really didn't care that much for the money. It's just we just wanted to be friends.
Right.
Even people there at Forge and Forest said they'd like to see us, get at each other a little bit more. They'd like want to raise the pot money, the money in the pot there to get at each other's throats. But we was just friends, especially three of us being members of the American Bladesmith Society. We had respect for each other.
Sure. Now the guy that does is supposed to be an expert with the knives, swords. He says it will kill.
Doug Mikado, yeah.
Yeah. Now, he's always fun to watch do the deal.
He is, and he's really a nice guy.
And he's the one that cut the hog in half.
Well, actually, his brother on the show, his shoulder was messed up.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, and
that's
so
right.
He
I
couldn't
remember
do
that.
it, so they got his brother to do it.
Oh, wow.
And the funny thing is, I talked to Doug Mikado before I made this trip to the Philippines, and got some advice from him. And I emailed him back and forth and told him I was doing a forging demonstration there, and he found that really interesting.
Yeah.
So
how did that go? You were in the Philippines. You did the forging demonstration. So what was that? What was that about?
Well, it was in a little small town there, a little village, and the a young lady there that I met up with named Mary Jane. She was fantastic, helping me, and so finding the equipment. I'm in a foreign country, and trying to find the equipment I need was challenging. I went to 6 different hardware stores there in Dumaguete, Philippines.
Yeah.
To try to find the equipment, and it was just finding files. Finally found one hardware store where I had several files to choose from. I was looking for just regular flat files.
Oh, really?
Big ones, and finally found a store there to find those, and then looking for. I was going to build a coal forge there, so I built one using a brake drum and a squirrel cage fan. So finding a brake drum, an OU's brake drum, was challenging. Just got lucky. I was riding around in Dumaguete, Philippines, and came up where this guy had some old axles and stuff, and I seen a brake drum laying there.
Yeah.
And I said, "Hey, right?" I told Mary, I told Jane, I said, "Let's get out right here and get this brake drum," and so got it back, and then trying to find the steel to make a knife out was challenging too. A guy gave me a no rusty file, and I made a little knife out of it while I was there, and then went back up in the hills to this lady that had just a piece of a leaf spring, and bought that off of her because there, if they're not going, it's going to be used. Whatever's there is going to be used, or it's going to be sold as scrap iron.
Yeah.
They salvage everything,
right?
But it turned out great. I mean, I got the forge going, and I didn't have everything I needed, but I'd done the best I could. I went through all the heat treat process, and there was, 15 or 20 people there watching demonstration, and it was fantastic.
That's great, and I guess they were there hopefully maybe to get involved or learn how to do it, that kind of thing.
There was actually a young man the next day. He was. I went back over, and he was actually forging a knife out of a big steel boat, and that was he caught on really good, and I think made a knife since then.
Yeah,
another one. So
I was going to ask you. I have a homemade knife that was made by a young Amish boy here locally. They at least, I don't know how many of them may do it, but if you run into any of the Amish people that are making knives or forging at all?
I have. There's a young man, I can't think of his name, but he I've been to his place and seen his setup, and he's doing real good. I can't think of his name right now.
Well, the young man I got mine from, he's not doing it now, but at the time he was still at his dad's place, Roman Yoder. He was a Yoder, and he I actually bought a knife from him. I think I gave him I think he asked $20 or $25 for it, and I just bought it. Mm-hmm. Best I remember, it had a deer horn handle, mm-hmm. and somewhat crude, I guess, but a pretty good little hunting knife, skinning knife, or whatever. And but I still have it. I still have the thing.
Good deal.
And he ended up being my backdoor neighbor years later. So Jacob is his name, and so we've been friends for a pretty good while. But he made that knife, and that's just kind of a keeper for me, kind of interesting.
Well, that's good. That's a good deal. Of course, they'll use coal for coal forge, and I've talked to some. They've asked me about doing a forge weld actually. Yeah. And so they're doing a good job.
His dad, he actually had a machine shop. Believe it or not,
I think that's one I know.
That's probably one because they had an actual machine shop out there,
kind of on a dead end road there.
Yeah, back in the dead end off of Denson Road out there.
Yeah, he asked me a lot of questions about how I did my stuff too.
Yeah. The guest today's been Dwight Phillips, and of course today's program is Friends and Neighbors, brought to you by Keller Williams Hood Company and my real estate services. And again, I want to thank you, Dwight, for coming out and being with us. It's been pretty awesome. I've learned a lot still, and we've still got a couple minutes left. But if you had some advice for somebody that wanted to try to get into it and wanted to start from scratch, maybe what would you say?
I would say get a small propane forge, an anvil, and a hammer, and start out with some small leaf springs or something, and just kind of start out kind of small and get a feel for it. And there's lots of good YouTube videos on forging. Try to watch the ones by ABS Master Smiths. And that's the ones you want to watch. And I started out small, and now it's took me years to get together all the equipment I've got, but that's kind of what I suggest. And you'll start out making knives, and you'll practically give them away, because your first knives, it'll take time before you actually sell knives for a profit.
You got to want to do it. It's got to be a hobby that you're going to enjoy.
It's got to be something that you want to do.
What's the oddest piece of metal that you ever made anything out of? Or is there something like that?
Well, I guess people get a kick out of a knife being made out of a steel cable, stranded steel cable.
Yeah, now that's different.
Yes, so what you got to do, you got to forge weld all those cable wires together, and it's called cable Damascus.
Okay.
So, and I made a few knives where I'd leave the cable as the handle. I won't hardly do that anymore, but that was, that's not something I do anymore, but people get a kick out of that.
That's interesting.
How'd you do that?
That's right. Well, Dwight, again, thank you for coming in.
That's been my pleasure.
On short notice, Dwight Phillips, everybody. And do you have a website of your own or anything like that for what you do, or just?
I don't. It's usually just by word of mouth.
And they can find you through this American Bladesmith
Society, and you can Google my name, Dwight Phillips Knives.
Yes.
And there is some YouTube videos on there, put on there by the History Channel. You can watch
really?
It. Yes, you can watch it.
Now, how did that come to be?
They just done it.
Very good. Very good. Well, I am so thrilled that you came in and really enjoyed the conversation. And, of course, fascinated with
I appreciate you inviting me.
It's been awesome. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
37 FD Lawrenceburg. Broadcast services of Prospect Communications.